And joining us now, David Lepofsky. He is the chair of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance. And we welcome you back to TVO, Dave. It's good to see you again.
Thank you very much.
Let's just start with some basic background before we get into the voting issues. And that is, we're told there are 1 million people in this province with a disability. Disability defined as what?
It's actually over 1.5 million, and that's a person with a significant physical or mental or sensory disability. I'm blind, I have a sensory disability. There are people who have learning disabilities. People who either can't walk at all, use a wheelchair, may use a scooter, may use a walker, may not be able to go significant distances, but where their physical or mental or sensory condition limits some of their activities if the environment isn't built accessibly.
Okay, a couple of Ontario governments in the past decade have tried to pass laws dealing with people who have disabilities, one in 2001, another attempt in 2005. Can you tell us what the 2005 Act attempted to do that the previous Act didn't cover?
Well, the first thing it does is it sets an end date by which Ontario must become fully accessible for people with disabilities. The goods, services, and employment opportunities everybody else enjoys have to be accessible to us. That's 2025. For some, that may seem a long way off, but it was felt that we needed an end date, and I know of no other jurisdiction in Canada or elsewhere that set an end date. The second thing it did is it applied this to the private as well as the public sector. It covers everybody. And the third thing it does is it requires the government to develop and then implement and enforce accessibility standards that explains to people what needs to be done to become accessible and by when. And to develop it, it's not just something that comes from Queen's Park. These are supposed to be developed in close consultation with experts in how to run a business, namely the business community, and experts in disabilities, namely people with disabilities.
Now, if they've got 15 years to pull this together still, how do you make sure that they are sort of on track and on time to meet those targets?
Well, we actually think they're behind schedule. They've had 20 years since the law was passed. They've already eaten up 5 years. There's a couple of ways, one of which is obviously going to the public and letting people know how things are going. But another way is we had built into the legislation a requirement that after 4 years, that was last year, the government had to appoint an independent review to see how things are going and recommend what needs to be done. That review was completed, and we're awaiting that final report and recommendations, which we hope will be out in the next few weeks.
And who's the guy in charge of the review?
The government appointed Charles Beer. He's a former cabinet minister from some years ago, but he's independent of the government now, to study, to listen to the disability community. We offered all sorts of ideas of what we thought needed to be done to get the government back on schedule to meet full accessibility by 2025, because we're very concerned that we're lagging behind.
Okay, then, and the final background question here. If, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is things are pathetic, and 10 is it's a paradise in Ontario if you happen to be disabled, where are we right now, roughly?
Well, I think we're way behind the United States. People who have a disability, and there's a lot of them, who are thinking of somewhere to go for a holiday, would much rather go to the States, where they can get easier access to hotels, restaurants, public transportation, tourist sites, and stuff like that, rather as compared to Canada and as compared to Ontario. Now, Ontario is making progress since 2005, but a lot of sleeves have been rolled up to work on this, but we think we need to be moving quicker.
We closer to 10 or closer to 1?
I'm not sure you could put a simple number on it at this point, because it's a work in progress. I think that there are countries that are way ahead of us and that there are countries that are way behind us. I think that once we get Charles Beer's report, and if he recommends speeding things up, we could get ourselves close to a 10 if the government puts itself on schedule, back on schedule, and does what needs to be done. Unfortunately, we're not there now.
Okay, let's talk voting, because for the whatever relatively small percentage of us that there is that do decide to vote, for most so-called able-bodied people, it's not that complicated. You show up to the polling station, you mark your X on the ballot, and so on. Mm-hmm. You've really recently complained to a group of MPPs hearing this issue that the province isn't doing enough to make voting accessible for people with disabilities. So let me ask you, first of all, in the last Ontario election, 2007, did you vote?
I sure did.
How did you vote? And by that I don't mean for whom did you vote. Okay. I mean, how did you actually do it?
Well, I can't see, but I can walk fine, so I don't have trouble getting into polling stations. Lots of people with disabilities face the prospect of a polling station they can't get into at all because of barriers. But in my case, I don't have a private ballot. The private ballot is fundamental to a democracy, to be able to mark your choice on your own. Nobody else knows who you voted for. Put it in the box and also check to make sure you got it right and you didn't spoil your ballot. I have two choices from Elections Ontario. I either have to get someone else to mark my ballot for me and hope they get it right and hope they didn't spoil the ballot and hope they keep their commitment to keep it confidential. And the other option is they give you a template you can lay over the ballot with a hole cut out where each of the spots are you can mark to vote for people. The problem is you never know if the template is lined up right and if you marked it correctly. So
How did you do it?
I had someone mark my ballot for me.
Someone you trust.
Someone I trust.
So you're reasonably confident it worked out okay.
I'm comfortable that the person who marked my ballot, who happens to be my wife, was as trustworthy as one could ever want. But
Okay.
I do not have what sighted people enjoy in this province, which is the right to a secret ballot.
Okay, give me an idea about how you could improve the process for people with disabilities.
This could be done. Well, there are two separate issues. One is making sure the polling station is accessible, that people could get in. And Elections Ontario, when they send you a card saying your polling station will be accessible, voters don't know till the moment they get there whether it'll turn out to be the case. A number of times it is, a number of times it isn't. And if it isn't, then it's too late.
Because some of them don't have ramps, I guess, and that kind of thing.
Or because they come in, and we found in the Toronto Centre by-election on February 4th, they moved, a principal at the school moved the polling station. I don't know how a principal got to decide this, but from a level access area to another level where you had to go downstairs because they were concerned about making sure a gym could be used for a volleyball game. So volleyball trumped democracy. So there's steps that can be taken to make sure they just pick polling stations that we can use, that we can get into. That requires some planning right now, and we've called on Elections Ontario right now to start planning for the polling locations to be used a year and a half from now. For marking the ballot independently, there is technology available that is affordable, that is workable, and that would be attractive not only to voters with vision loss like me, but I think to everybody, and that would be telephone or internet voting. If you could pick up your phone and bank by phone or bank by internet or file your income tax by internet, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to cast your ballot. The government was concerned about ensuring security. I think the banks could explain to them how to ensure security because they're protecting your and my money from being stolen. I suspect somebody's going to be more interested in hacking in to get my money before they want to hack in to get my vote.
Okay, that's probably true. Having said that, I did read some of the transcripts of the committee at Queen's Park that listened to this issue, and one of the numbers they put forward was that they had apparently looked into this a little bit and thought it might cost $15,000 a copy for voting machines at polling places, for example. I mean, A, is that true? And B, if it isn't true, is that a problem?
No, they were talking about something different. The government passed a law. We fought to get this changed. They passed a law that actually bans internet voting and bans telephone voting in Ontario. It actually makes a certain form of access technology illegal, which is unheard of. Instead, and I'll get back to what they put in to lift that ban, because there's a process to try to lift it. But what they put in place as an interim measure is the government, Elections Ontario, had tested out a voting machine. It's a standalone machine. It's not connected to a network, where someone like me could put on some headphones, click on it, and listen to the different options and click what ballot, who I want to vote for. It'll print out a ballot and it'll tell me how it was marked. That's the machine that's supposed to cost $11,000, and even those figures I think are high. The government committed to put one of those machines in each riding, not one in each poll, one in each riding, which means sighted people get to vote in the polling station nearest their house. Blind people get one polling station per riding where they can exercise a private vote and verify their choice. And that's not equality. We said they don't need to spend money on any of this hardware because telephone voting could be done with a central piece of technology. They don't have to have machines for processing this in every polling station. You just vote from home or vote from on the telephone or via internet. And it would be way cheaper. So the government opted for the more expensive option and the less accessible option. And I said they put in a process for lifting the ban. Originally, the bill would have made it permanently illegal to use telephone or internet voting. But what they've done after our advocacy efforts is to say that Elections Ontario must study this, so they gave them a leisurely 3 years to do what could probably be accomplished in a few months to study it. They let Elections Ontario test it and can recommend that a committee of the legislature lift the ban after the 2011. So we've got to wait 3 years for them to study it, at least 2 years or a year and a half before they could even consider lifting the ban. And it leaves our democratic rights in the hands of the unelected Elections Ontario on whether they're going to recommend that the legislature even consider lifting the ban.
Okay, I get everything you're saying here, but here's the smart-ass question, for lack of a better way to put it. Do you know for a fact that more people with disabilities would in fact vote if in fact this simpler technology were in place?
Well, here's the irony. Politicians and pundits all bemoan when we have low voter turnout. We're folks who want to vote. We're people, when this issue came up at Queen's Park, this elections reform bill that was just before the legislature over the past couple of months, the overwhelming feedback on the bill, the public hearings on the bill were predominantly the focus of folks with disabilities coming forward, who want to be able to vote, who want to be able to vote independently, similarly writing politicians and so on, and the media. So we are hearing from the disability communities, yes, they do want to vote. They do want to have the freedom that everybody else enjoys to be able to get into a polling station or at least over the phone be able to mark their ballots independently.
Well, let me put a chart up that might speak to that as well. Michael, let's put this up if we can. Here's Ontario voter turnout. The numbers here are not great for people who care about people showing up to the polls to vote. We've got back in 1975, almost 70% of the people voting, and in the last Ontario election in 2007, we've got barely over half the people voting. Question is, do you have any evidence that there is a correlation between the inaccessibility of either a polling station or the vote itself and voter turnout?
How would you prove that? The only information we have, and I think it's telling, is that Elections Ontario itself, that's the body that runs elections, did a survey, they commissioned Ipsos Reid to do an independent survey of voters with disabilities in the 2007 election to see what their experience was. Fully 44% encountered difficulties or barriers trying to vote. 44%. Now, that makes Florida in the 2000 election sound like a paragon of democracy. People with disabilities, almost 1 out of every 2 surveyed, encountered difficulties. It seems to me that somebody else would have to make the case why that wouldn't deter people from voting, rather than the reverse.
Greg Sorbera, the MPP, you know, from Vaughan, during the committee hearing said he understood that perhaps offering internet voting or some kind of electronic voting to people with disabilities might help them, but he thought it might also be a Charter of Rights issue because you got to offer it to everybody. You can't just offer it to one group in particular. Is that
well? Right now,
accurate?
For one thing, we're content to have it offered for everybody. We think voters without disabilities would love to vote by the phone or by internet, or to be given that option. Coburg did it in 2006, liked it so much they're doing it in 2010 again at the municipal level, and other municipalities elsewhere in the world have done it as well. So we're not trying to restrict it to us. But in any event, using Mr. Sorbera's standard, we're using a method of voting right now that already singles out a group for worse treatment. It's called the paper ballot. And the victims of that inequality are people like the person you're interviewing right now.
Gotcha. Okay, so all of this is in a bill that's making its way through the bowels of Queen's Park and so on. Where do things stand now?
The bill was passed. We've written Elections Ontario to say, okay, we'd like you to get to work quickly, please. Elections Ontario, the chief electoral officer, who you had on the show a couple of months ago, Greg Essenza, admitted openly before a committee of the legislature that Elections Ontario has substantial improving to do in the area of meeting the needs of voters with disabilities. We agree. We've offered to work with them, but we've also said they shouldn't take a leisurely 3 years to study the telephone voting that Coburg's already been using, is going to be using for the second time. They should get to work on it now and be ready to ask the legislature to lift the ban on it January 1, 2012, as soon as the law allows.
One last thing, and that is people obviously have followed your career as you have worked and championed issues around disability, and I think it's fair to say that one of the reasons they may know you best is you're the guy that got the drivers on the Toronto Transit Commission to announce the stops. So if you take the bus, the subway, or a streetcar, they announce the stops now because you made it. You made it so. The question is, it doesn't happen everywhere around Ontario. There are a lot of transit systems that are still fighting you and that don't want to force their drivers to do that. Do you think it's possible that you're going to see one standard set of service for everybody in every transit system around this province soon?
That is exactly what is supposed to be done under the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act that was passed 5 years ago. And a transit standard was proposed to the government to address this across the board. And we've been waiting months and months for the government to finalize the terms of that standard. But We won legislation to require them to do it. They got a proposal on the government's desk, and we're just waiting for them to get it done and get it out there, get it implemented, and get it enforced.
Have you yet heard a good reason why drivers can't do this?
Absolutely not. Every bus has a driver, every driver has a mouth, and hopefully they know where they are.
Well, I know where we are. We're at the end of our time. David, it's always good of you to come into TVO and visit us. We appreciate it very much.
Thanks so much for having me on.